I am so excited for the interview today because this founder is someone who has helped to create and solve a problem with his business that I run into as an employer. I love talking to people who solve my problems, just like every one of your clients does. And what this person has done is he's been able to take and solve a problem that he was facing as an employer overseas. And he developed a solution that solved the problem for himself, which later became something that he was able to sell to other business owners dealing with that same challenge. How many of you are in that same boat? I hope all of you. I hope all of you recognize the power that comes from solving a problem. And when you solve the problem better than other people, people pay you to solve it for them too. So that's what I love about this interview. A lot of you also are going to find some real value in this interview from hearing about how he's been able to successfully exit 3 companies now in just a decade and be able to develop a pattern through which he builds, grows, sells, and how he continues to learn from each one and grow through each exit into the next bigger and bigger play. It inspired me to do the interview, and I hope it inspires you as you consider the steps you need to take to grow and scale your company. Thanks so much for being here today, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Growth and Scaling Podcast. This is your host, Todd Westra, and I am so glad you're here today because we are going to interview an amazing founder or executive who is going to share with us their decisions that they made that exploded their growth. So if you need some inspiration, you want to hear how other businesses are doing it, this is a place to be, and we are glad you're here. Enjoy this episode. I'm your host, Todd Westra, and today we have an amazing guest. Tim, he is a man after my own passion. He has built international businesses all over the world, so to speak, in the fact that he has jumped in and launched a business all the way over in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and he is based in Toronto, Canada. So North America doing business overseas. I love guys like this, and I'm confident his story is going to give us some good insights into growth and scaling. So Tim, tell us a little bit about it. Who are you? And what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing journey, to be honest, going from Montreal to Toronto and then all the way to Southeast Asia somehow. So a bit about myself. I've built and sold 3 businesses so far, all in different industries, ranging from consulting to ad tech, and now most recently fintech in Southeast Asia and the Philippines. Awesome. Most specifically. So a wild adventure, and all of these businesses, my goal as a founder was growth and basically scaling the companies from the ground up all the way to an exit. And I'm here to share a little bit more about that today with you.
Awesome. Well, having done it 3 times, were they all 3 in the Philippines?
No. So the first 2 were in Canada. So the first one was a presentation design agency called Stinson Design, which was basically my first project right out of university. And I'll touch base on how I got into that when we discuss some of your, the questions later on. But yeah, I built that in Montreal and then scaled it in Toronto. Cool. And sold it eventually after 5 years. Then the second one was an ad tech business that I started in Toronto, but took me all the way to the Philippines when I needed a lot of developers.
I love it.
That I couldn't afford necessarily in Canada, but needed to grow and scale. Essentially, our team grew to 25 developers in the Philippines at one point, at which point we sold. But that helped me sort of discover that the Philippines was a completely untapped market for tech startups.
I love it.
The same way we're doing it here, networking in the Philippines was super helpful. Meeting other potential founders, which led to the company that is now called Tendo, which we just exited back in November 2022 to a Philippine bank.
Oh yeah, to a Philippine bank.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, my favorite Philippine bank always says we find ways. So anyway,
nice.
So the BDO slogan there. Listen, so tell us about this. I mean, you obviously have grown out of necessity into different markets, different parts of the world. Montreal to Quebec? Is that what you said?
Toronto.
To Montreal to Toronto, and then from there into the Philippines, out of necessity. But each time you did that, you kind of took one step further. Am I correct in hearing that?
That's actually correct. I mean, leveraging what you learned from the previous venture and applying it and trying to avoid any mistakes you might have made in the past as well. But you're absolutely right. All the moves were out of necessity. I think the first move, it's kind of a shame, but when I built the business in Montreal, my target audience or my target clients were North American.
Right.
And as a consultant or like a presentation design consultancy, when I displayed that I was based in Montreal, they always assumed that I was a francophone or that my team back in the days was francophone. Team was myself and I. But we looked a lot bigger on LinkedIn, that's for sure. Right. So they assumed we were francophone, and then I decided to make a move to Toronto. And as soon as we did that, and I say we again, it's just me at that point, starting to scale the team. But everything blew up, basically. Like the designs we were working on and the content we were making basically was much more powerful, effective. Clients wouldn't look twice and just signed because of our abilities, not because of our location. So it was out of necessity.
Awesome.
And then so like the candy banners, which was the ad tech business in Toronto, once again, out of necessity, we needed to find Flash developers that were affordable so we could make a margin on our business. Yeah. And we sort of put out feelers in about 7 countries on Upwork, or was it Elance back in the day, one or the other. And we found this really cool guy in the Philippines, which I knew nothing about the Philippines at that time.
Right.
And realized they were fluent in English, really hardworking, talented, and most of all, really affordable, comparable to India or other places like that.
For sure.
And to me, that was like music to my ears. And like one guy became 2, became 4, became very quickly. We went to the Philippines and built an office, built a structure, and just took it from there,
I love it. Now in these 3 exits, congratulations, by the way. That's so awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
How do you, like looking back on that whole progression, what was your favorite part about that growth journey?
Well, it's interesting because the first 2 were bootstrapped, and so they were really good cash cows at the time, and I had no intention to sell either. So that's another thing that we did out of necessity. The first one was for personal reasons. I needed to exit it because the person I was in business with, we were no longer in a so-called relationship. So yeah, something like that. Yeah. But basically I sold it, although it was a very good business, very profitable, great cash cow. Yeah. The second one, we started focusing, me and my business partner on candy banners, we also business partners on Tendo Pay, which is the fintech in the Philippines.
Right.
And, the business was on autopilot, candy banners. We were happy. We had, very good, like in the 7 figures, basically, revenue, good profitability. And it was on autopilot, so we didn't have to work on it much. Our team was very established and our clientele was there. But one day a client of ours came through and said that they wanted to acquire us because they wanted to get into the production field. So again, out of necessity, we said, hey, let's just offload our plate, just give it away, and then focus on Tendo Pay. And that kind of worked out.
That's awesome.
But now that we're in a funded, sort of venture-funded startup, Tendo Pay, it's a complete different ballgame. Yeah. We have a lot more eyeballs on the business, accountability, reporting, all that stuff. So very different experience, but I'm learning a lot from this one too. So it's awesome.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, you must have done it well because you're already exited.
Yeah, I mean, circumstances, COVID helped us for a bit, then really hurt us because I don't know if you remember the post-COVID venture cap apocalypse where no one was investing. Yeah, that's when we were raising our Series B. And unfortunately, every single door, we had a lot of openings to begin with. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, no, we're
just
not doing any deals right
stuff.
now.
Yeah.
And we were like 3 months away from shutting the business down. So
oh no,
we started talking to sort of, I mean, how do you call them? Local partners, essentially like banks and anyone who could potentially see a benefit of working with a lending company like ourselves.
Right.
And it just so happened that one of the neo banks in Southeast Asia was looking to grow their revenue operations to buy income, essentially.
Yeah.
And it worked out. In the end,
That's awesome.
Would we have wanted to grow it further and get a better deal? Maybe, but we're actually super happy with the outcome. We're very aligned with our acquirer. They're really fun to work with, and the capital that they're injecting is helping us immensely achieve our goals. So in the end, I'm very happy.
Love it.
We got lucky, essentially. That's the idea. Yeah.
Well,
sure.
You know what? You never get lucky if you're not putting yourself out there.
Yeah, you make your own luck. I completely believe in that.
Yep.
But sometimes you make it and it just doesn't happen. So
totally, dude. I love that. So of that journey, your favorite part was what? What was it? Was it the building of the teams? Was it the finding the acquisitions? Was it like what about that whole thing? I mean, you've done it 3 times now. Is there something that just kind of keeps you going, and you're already thinking about the 4th?
For sure. So what keeps me going is essentially solving a problem, not necessarily like bringing a solution to a market that doesn't exist, but more finding an optimal way or like an innovative way of doing something that is broken, essentially.
Yeah.
So whether it's automating our systems, our processes, our lead acquisition funnel, our sales automation, anything to do with like automation and improvement of systems is what I'm passionate about.
Awesome.
So that's why I've gone from one industry to the other, because at the end of the day, the industry, I'm quite agnostic to it. It's more like, okay, I can understand the product. None of them are, that complicated. We're not dealing with rocket science.
Yeah.
It's more about, is the business sort of profitable? Or if it's not with current incumbents, like, is there a way to make it profitable by skimming the fat or sort of improving the business model overall? And that's what I'm interested in. So I don't have a 4th idea in mind, but when the earnout is over and maybe I'll stay on board, who knows? There's new challenges with Tendo Pay all the time, but if not, it'll probably be something completely different. And I'm excited to find out what it is.
That's awesome. I love it. I love that you're a guy like me who thinks about things like that. It's, hey, here's a problem to be solved. Let me come up with a creative and innovative way to solve that problem. And then it has been interesting to see, though, and hear you talk about your exits kind of just happening as opposed to planning for the exit. Have you ever considered that? Yeah. I mean, have you ever considered that as like a better way, smarter way? I'm just kind of curious. What are you thinking?
No, I'll be honest. Like, if you have a plan with your exit, you're probably going to extract a lot more value because you're going to hit certain targets that are going to trigger certain multipliers and then a certain exit. With us, we're sort of like always, it's hard to say the victim because, when you make a decent amount of money, you're not a victim in any way. But you're the victim of a circumstance in which you have less leverage to maximize your value. So that's what happens when you're getting an acquisition as part of a consequence of something else. But I think, that's actually a lesson learned for my 4th company, if it ever happens, is to sort of follow a plan, not get too overexcited to sell. If someone wants to buy you now, someone else will want to buy you later. No one's doing it out of pity. Just make sure you have the liquidity to get to your next goal, and so on and so forth. That's the lesson learned for me.
That's some great advice. Now, as you have gone through each of these journeys, what would you say has been your biggest challenge? Like, what's the biggest setback that you tend to find yourself hitting, and how do you avoid it?
I mean, growth is always challenging. However you look at it, it's like you're basically trying to extract money from someone else in exchange
Yeah.
for a service or a product, right?
Right.
So no one's just willingly going to do it, or you're going to have to educate them on what it is you're offering. And that's been the case for the first two businesses, consulting and ad tech. We had to sell the product, sell the idea, sell the benefits.
Right.
But with North American clients, it was relatively easy once we were able to get in front of them and to present them with a case study. Usually they saw the value and the cost and the ROI, and it was a no-brainer. But in the Philippines, when we started this fintech, our goal was to do a B2C play. And when you're lending money in the Philippines, it's relatively easy. So my job as the head of growth back then was relatively easy in the sense that we would just promote the fact that we had this very innovative lending solution. And I'm sure I could have said just lending and removed the innovative, and we would have grown quite rapidly. So within the first year, I think we got 500,000 users or something.
Wow.
But what we realized quickly was that growth and users were not our problem. What was our problem was risk, and making sure that when we gave money, we got it back, hopefully with a bit of interest.
Right.
So we quickly pivoted to a completely different model, which was more of a B2B to C model, whereby we would extend our services as part of an employee benefits package. So the companies, we would have to sign companies who would then promote Tendo Pay to their employees as a new employee benefit. So now acquiring the users was sort of like a twofold enterprise.
Yeah.
And it became more of an enterprise B2B sales process than anything else, which I'm used to, but in the Philippines it's very different. What I realized that selling to a Filipino company or a Filipino team is more of an emotional matter, building trust over time, versus a rational ROI driven decision in North America. So I had to rethink the whole process, and also training sales teams was different. So I would say overall, it's always challenging. Just there's a solution out there. It's just like you have to sit down and understand the market, understand who you're going after, how they think, and build something around that, as opposed to taking like a cookie cutter solution that works in one market and apply it to yours.
I love that you just shared that whole little journey, because what it kind of told me is that, one of your biggest challenges is client profiling. Initially you thought you were helping the end users, but in actuality, you discovered that you were providing a solution for an employer who had employees who needed the solution, and they could now look like the good guy by providing it to them. Is that kind of how your journey went?
That's exactly it. I mean,
I love it.
In the Philippines, companies sort of get requested to provide loans to employees. The employees go to the employer for that, more than anyone. And so we were helping them get away from this completely irrelevant business practice that they had, and taking on all the risk, all the work, and sort of making them the good guy at the same time. So
that's amazing. I just did that yesterday, actually.
Yep. Okay. There you go. Salary advances.
Yeah, salary advance because of a medical procedure, and felt bad, but just typical.
Of course. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Who else are they going to turn to be honest? That's our selling factor, is that banks, financial institutions, they're barely underwriting the top 10% of the population there.
I know.
Everyone else, regardless of any sort of good revenue, there's just no data to underwrite. So we had to find a workaround,
Wow. That's very cool. So as you see other businesses, both domestically, or I should say North America based, Southeast Asian based, no matter where you're at in the world, you're going to run into these problems of client profiling and really knowing who is your buyer as opposed to who you think the buyer is. What advice do you give to these companies who struggle to figure that out?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, just spend time with the clients, sort of sit down with them and have conversations, not necessarily selling them, but sort of getting insights into what they're dealing with. So we have at Tendo Pay, the way we started scaling with really massive groups, and I'm talking, 5,000-10,000 headcounts, was essentially finding the key people in those corporations befriending them, like actually spending time building relationship, making them a champion, basically a believer in you and then your product. And then it happened organically. So I have an example where one of our largest clients right now, they're close to 10,000 headcount.
Love it.
But I spoke to the head of HR, like the top HR sort of manager there, for over a year and a half, casually, just like that. You know, LinkedIn messaging at first, and then, okay, let's email. Then, oh, what's your Viber? Let's catch up. Let's talk about this and that. What are you working on? Like, what problems are you facing? Cool, this is what I'm doing. Like, one thing led to another, and you make friends with them, and then they want to promote you internally. They want to win together. They feel like it's their necessity. So that's what I suggest. And everyone hates that answer because sales teams are driven by immediate results. But unfortunately, when you want to build these like big contracts, it's more like a long-term relationship, and you can't expect any return. You just have to put out feelers, put out messaging, build relationships, and then something will pick up. And that's why
I love it.
I think managing sales team is tough because I know the reality, but on the flip side, I want results. So, you know, it's always tough because the sales guys themselves will listen to what you have to say about how to approach it, but then say, hey, I need to mass mail 10,000 people, get meetings, and try to sign one. That's like, you know what I mean? It's a conundrum.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, this is great. I love this conversation. As you have built and grown, and you hit these challenges where you're maybe, you know, you talked a little bit about how you've tried to really understand the needs of your client by talking to them. Are there people in your network, in your circle, that you look to as kind of an inspiration, who maybe you want to give a quick shout out to, who are like, okay, every time I felt irritated or bothered by these problems, I would just look at this person and they kind of inspired me. There's someone you think of that could be a good shout out?
Yeah. So completely irrelevant of what I've said, but I do have a shout out for Eric Dick and the DTC podcast, because as much as I've been doing sales for these type of enterprise and like SaaS and sort of B2B things,
right,
at the end of the day, I love scaling D2C brands. It's something I did on the side, you know, built some e-commerce stores and all that stuff. Every time I listen to that podcast, I get super inspired by how all these marketers are hacking their way into growing sales.
I love it.
And I usually get inspiration from their application of growth and just, you know, bring it to my sort of boring B2B enterprise sales systems. So I always get inspiration from that podcast. It's like a very, very interesting one. And they're out here in Canada as well. So, you know, shout out to Eric Dick.
I love it. We're going to tag them. We're going to tag him and get him a shout out from you. So I appreciate that. Hey, Tim, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show. And I love your journey. I cannot wait to catch up with you after the call and talk about some war stories and experiences in the Philippines. But for those of you out there looking for excuses or looking for ways to help grow and scale your companies, I hope you gained something from this episode. Tim is one of those guys who has now done this 3 times. You need to listen to these things. Like, it is not easy. It's not always what you think your product is going to be. You're going to hit these challenges and it's going to be hard. But Tim, where do people follow you? Are you active? It sounds like you're active on LinkedIn. Are there other places people can go to find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn mostly. I mean, email is great too. I'm on Twitter, but mostly for receiving information rather than sharing it, unfortunately.
I hear you.
I'm trying to get my chat GPT on to put out content, but it's not there yet.
Awesome. Well, dude, I appreciate it. We're going to put links to Tendo Pay and his other things that he's got in the works right now in his show notes. So if you haven't taken a look at the show notes, go ahead and click on the link and find how to connect with Tim. We're grateful to have you on the show today, Tim.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Hey, what did you think of that? I love that interview. There were so many parts of it that I loved. I have operated businesses in the Philippines now since 2006, and I have run into the need that his business solves multiple times. But what I thought was really inspiring was how he naturally built these businesses that he's done out of necessity. He naturally built them to solve problems that he was facing. And I think that that's a powerful lesson to be learned. Oftentimes when we grow and scale a business, we run into this situation where we think we really understand our problem that we're solving, and then we get distracted doing things that we think the client needs, as opposed to listening to that client and tweaking our business to fit the deeper needs of our clients. What ends up happening? Well, our growth goes stagnant because we're not solving the problems, the deeply rooted problems of our clients. Imagine if you just listened, you took a step back and did what Tim said, talk to those clients, figure out what the deeper needs are, and accommodate using a solution that you can create that will generate more revenue for your business. I love it. I love it. This has been a great episode. If you know people who can find value in learning what it takes to grow and scale their business through this episode, please share it. There's a link on your podcast listening device, your listening service, where you can share this on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, anywhere you want to share it, and get people to buy into this show. This is a fascinating place where we bring in founders and decision makers who have learned and to grow and scale their business in ways that will hopefully help you grow and scale your business through the sharing of their stories. Thanks again for being here. We hope you have a great one.